Okay, so I was basically just going to go through similar workflow to what I showed you last week, but showing you much more complex and detailed project that's been basically taken right to completion. And so I'm just going to focus though on the CAD and the 3D and the rendering aspects, and we'll look at the final presentation options afterwards. So you can see that these main points I've listed for the CAD software. Establishing the main parameters and constraints of the design. So that means putting in all of the critical elements, especially anything that needs measurements. And I'll give you an example of that in a minute in the project in Revit. And then the base model of the spaces. So again, all the bulk elements, anything that can be modeled in the CAD program probably should be. And if possible, using BIM functionality, and I'll show you exactly why that's important in a moment. And while you're doing that, avoiding unnecessary detail. And so I'll show you in the 3D model where there's a lot of detail that isn't in the CAD version of this project. All right, so I'll just switch over to the Revit. All right, so here's the Revit model of this project. So you can see everything that's grey is existing. So it's actually just this site in the middle that is having work done. On either side, there are the neighbours' buildings. Now, they're important because they establish the constraints. They're going to have a big influence on the site in terms of, overshadowing, views, and privacy, all of those other things. So it's important to model the parts of them that are relevant, but most of the modelling detail obviously is in the actual subject, site. And so everything that's coloured there is new. And so if you don't know the history of this one, basically council made me keep the existing building as it is, the front part. Originally I wanted to put another story on top of this and extend out, but they said no, you've got to do this silly thing like the neighbours have done and make it look like it's single story from the front, but then they let me do 2-story at the back, so that was okay in the end. Oh, sorry, 3-story in the back. I was happy with 2 originally, but right, so that's all been modelled in 3D. Being a BIM program, that not only generates the 3D views, but the plans as well. So maybe I'll just quickly show you. There are quite a few plans here, which you'll see when you open them, look a bit messy. But that's because everything's turned on in those. In fact, I'll start with an even earlier one. This is the existing building. So it's just single story at the moment. And so all the rooms and things there are mainly going to be knocked down, the back half of it, but the front walls there are going to be retained. So with Revit, using phases, you can actually model all of the existing and retain it in the project. You don't need to delete it if it's going to be demolished. You actually have a demolish tool within Revit. Have any of you used phases in Revit? No. So it's a really important tool that is used all the time in Revit. Every single project I work on, I use phases. But when you're doing student projects, it's easy to overlook it because you don't often need to show things the way you would for a real-world project. In real-world projects, you need to show everything that's existing, show exactly what's going to be demolished, and then show the new work clearly delineated from the proposed work. So in Revit, you use phases for that. In AutoCAD, you can just use layers, but Revit has this specialised tool, phases, which will do a lot of things for you. And I'll just give you a good example. You saw here on the other copy of the plan that I've got some of the walls shown black. They're the existing walls, the ones I've tagged as existing. I've got some of the walls here with this funny hatch. They're the walls to be demolished. And then some of the other walls are shown as they would be normally with their various materials. They're the new walls. And that's a standard convention. I'll just show you in the plan that was used on the sheet in the end, it's much clearer. So again, The black walls, forget this one, that's actually meant to be covered over, but the black walls basically are existing, and that's a standard way of showing existing. Everything that's coloured is new. The grey flooring is, if anything, is existing, except I know it's unclear here that the stair is the same. But the grey walls, they're coloured, so they're not black anyway, so you know that they're new walls. I thought it's better not to show the construction detail there because it really wasn't necessary. So again, all of this is new work, and then going up onto the next level, again, that's all new except for the part at the front here. Okay, so all of that is contained within the one building information model. From that 3D model, not only do I get the 3D views and the plan sections as sections and elevations, but also the different views at each different stage. So you want as much information is going to be useful in the CAD program. And if it's a BIM program, that's going to be a lot. And it's not necessarily just geometry, like it would be in AutoCAD. It's all sorts of information like phase information, the different door constructions and window constructions, that can all be built up in schedules and things like that in Revit. So lots of things. Shadows as well is something, but we don't need to look at that, but you can have that in a series of views stored in the file. So all of that then goes together to make the orthographic views, and that's something you can't neglect. So for all of your projects, I'd say, I shouldn't probably tell you this in a subject that's meant to be based around 3D, but these drawings are actually more important than your 3D. If you haven't got this right, you may as well forget the rest of the drawings. Your orthographics have to be right. You just won't get any work apart from anything else if you can't do these drawings. But not only that, the project really can't go ahead until these drawings are right. The 3D drawings are a nice thing to have, the rendered views and other things you'll get from your 3D model, but you can actually get by without them, and people have for thousands of years. Well, not even, yeah, they are later on going to be construction drawings, they'll all be orthographics, but in the conceptual, and schematic phases, they're still important to explain the design. So plans, sections, elevations need to be drawn appropriately at each stage. So I'd still consider these concept drawings, even though I've put dimensions on so they could be lodged for DA. But there's no construction detail shown there really. There's just dimensions and nothing more than door and window numbers, so that can all be tied to a door and window schedule. And a few notes on construction just to keep council happy. But I didn't put any real detail in the actual plan. So without the notes and things like that, that would be fine as a concept drawing. It's always good to have some notes anyway. So that's the sort of thing you need to think about for your CAD drawings and your CAD models, as much as is necessary to describe the design without going into too much detail, particularly things that are just representations. So by that I mean, you might have, say, a curtain, and in this, there obviously would be lots of curtains on the windows, and so in the window on the, in here, there would definitely need to be a curtain on this window. Now you don't need to show it in your floor plan, in your Revit model. Also, I mean, some people go crazy and show those things, but you shouldn't. You should never do that. Also, even in your 3D views, you shouldn't see things like that in your CAD program. But in the finished renders that you do, it's going to look unfinished if you don't have those little details. So you'll see in the in the 3D model that I've imported into 3D Studio Max, all those little details have been added. So, and I'll just prove that to you. Okay, so here, that's the same window. I'll just maximize this so it's easier for you to see. So that's the same window that I just showed you, it's right there, and there's the curtain that goes with it, because in this render, it would just look incomplete if there wasn't something to add a bit more detail there. Looking at the other frames, so I'll just show you well, I'll just show you some different renders. I've got some stills somewhere here. Oh yeah, so that was all done in the 3D program as well. There's no point doing that in Revit. In fact, it'll slow the Revit file down too much. So that's all been added afterwards in 3D. So it's all fully modelled. So that, yeah, because without it, the render again would just look wrong. That's all existing. That's being retained, so it's got to be there. And 3D programs can do that. It's not that hard, believe it or not. That only took me about half an hour to model all of that. Because it is, you know, repeated. It's a repeated pattern. Not as hard as it looks. So, and then looking at the furniture as well. Furniture is another one where people struggle in CAD programs. So, you know, just looking closely at, say, these lounges here. To make them look realistic, they need a lot of irregular surfaces, which is pointless in a CAD program. Try and do that in Revit, it'll just make it fall over. But in your 3D, to make them look professional, you need that level of detail. Okay, so I'll just show you in... Yeah, there's all sorts of tools for that. I actually used a thing called a noise modifier, but yeah, so these cushions, if they were just flat rectangles, obviously wouldn't look anywhere near as good. And I'll just show you in different views what they look like. So, where are we? You can. And yeah, that definitely works. So the workflow is to go from Revit into 3D Studio Max. That's the one I'm going to recommend, but you can also go from AutoCAD or even ArchiCAD if you really want to. So I'll just quickly show you. I've got some stills somewhere here that are going to be easier to walk you through, and there we are. So okay, so again, plants. Too much work in a CAD program, modelling them in like that, but you can do it in a 3D program. All those little extra details, all the little, you know, vases and things I've added here, even the TV, something that you can do in a very basic way in a CAD program, but much easier to model accurately in 3D program. So this is all taken from that model I've been showing you. No, that model I'm showing you is the same one I showed you in Revit. So it started out, yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. So you'll see if I zoom right out, you'll see it looks quite similar to what I was showing you in Revit. I'll just go to shaded and you can see it's obviously the same model, but it's had a lot added to it in 3D Studio Max. But it's the same model. And so even, say, the roofing there, you might have always wondered how with corrugated roofing or something like that, you show the detail properly. So here you can see that there's actually detail. I'll show you the full render that I've got that shows the whole view from the street, and you'll see it's all modelled in the 3D program. But you would never do that in Revit. A lot of people make the mistake trying to do that sort of thing in Revit or some other program like it. It's just too much work, and it will slow it down too much. So it's just a matter of, you know, breaking down the different things you need to make, and according to the different software you need to use for those things. Yeah. Well, you'll need to have a simplified version often for all of it in your CAD program. But then you have a more complex version that's realistic in your 3D program. So a good example is a chair. These chairs we're sitting on, you would never model those.
Would that be like based on the same block and then
Yeah.
and then you go into 3D
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And then with that change in that,
No, no. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, you can take things from the 3D program back into a CAD program, but that's a different process. So essentially what we'll be looking at is having the main model in the CAD program and then linking that into the 3D program and adding things to it there.
and every time you make a change, you have to show up in the field.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the way we'll be doing it anyway, because we'll be linking. So, so I've listed all those main points there. So we'll be import or linking the base model from the CAD program. In this case, I'll be showing how to do it with Revit into 3D. In this case, 3D Studio Max, and then doing some modelling, adding in detail, and basically getting more complexity for the rendered views than you'll be able to with the CAD programs. And it's a great modeler. If you've never used a 3D modelling program and thought that the CAD programs were limiting your design possibilities, you'll see that 3D programs will basically let you create anything. Almost, yeah, absolutely anything. I was going to say almost, but not even almost. Anything you can think of. All right, so this next workflow, how are we going for time? Yeah, I can get through this before maybe letting you have a break. The materials. Now, you probably have some experience with this if you know Revit, but if you mainly have used AutoCAD, you might not be as familiar with this. I don't know, those of you who've been using AutoCAD, did you do materials? Like AutoCAD for 3D, I mean. Did you do materials in AutoCAD or did you use AccuRender?
We did AccuRender for about 5 seconds.
Ah, okay. So you didn't even do much rendering? Yeah. Sure, sure. Well, it's kind of good in a way because they're different rendering engines. Yeah.
I use CAD over
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
I don't know it that well. I know like it's here, it's basics like how to do all
Yeah, yeah.
and yeah, I don't know.
Okay, well, do you all know the rendering engine that Revit uses?
Sorry.
Do you all know the rendering engine? Yeah, and do you know what rendering engine you're using when you use Revit? No, it's similar. It's Mental Ray. Yeah, yeah. Mental Ray in Revit. So Mental Ray is not made by Autodesk, but it may as well be. I don't think they've taken over Mental Labs yet, but they're so close, they may as well be the same company. Even though Mental Labs is based in Germany and Autodesk is obviously American, I don't know what the deal is, but they've got some sort of agreement and they work very closely. So Mental Ray, you'll find, is a rendering engine that comes with a lot of different Autodesk programs, and I'll give you some good examples of that in a moment. But AccuRender, some of you were saying you used in AutoCAD, and I used to teach you when we taught AutoCAD 3D, and mainly I taught AccuRender there as well. So AccuRender, it's still around, believe it or not. Have a look at AccuRender RT. It's not far off Mental Ray. It's pretty good, but you've got to pay for it. Mental Ray is free. It comes with AutoCAD, comes with Revit, comes with 3D Studio Max, and it's way better than AccuRender. Definitely better than the old version. AccuRender RT, the new one, like I said, is not bad, but Mental Ray is still better, and it's free. Mental Ray. Yeah, that's it. And the guys are a bit nuts, you'll see. There's some really crazy guys. Sven he's from Sweden, believe it or not. Have a look on the internet, and he's one of the main bloggers on Mental Ray. He's done some programming for it as well, and you'll see anyway. He does his own videos. He's a crazy guy, but they're genius programmers. Anyway, I'll talk to you more about the programming and different rendering stuff in a minute, but you do need to think about the rendering software even when you are working in CAD programs. You've got to be aware. I mean, at a basic level, when you're just learning, you don't need to know all the ins and outs of this, but now that you're starting to put it all together with different software, you really have to be aware which programs you're using and the options that you've got available, and why you'd need to work in certain ways. So, so I've gone to Max. I want to go to Revit. Okay, so just to prove to you that this is mental ray in Revit, if I go to materials, I've got then under render appearance, when I click replace, a whole list of different materials. Now notice how this is the Autodesk library. That Autodesk library is actually a library of mental ray materials. You don't get that, you can't use it if you don't have mental ray. Or, I'll tell you in a minute, there's another engine that can use it, but that's kind of a bonus feature. But essentially, if you were using AccuRender, you wouldn't be able to use these materials. There'd be a different sort of materials, and you just couldn't use this library. Believe it or not, Revit used to use AccuRender. It's one of those weird coincidences, but that was just a coincidence. They were never connected with, it was McNeil, the company that made AccuRender, never connected with them, and they ditched it as soon as they could because Mental Labs were obviously doing better things. So, so the options that you have here anyway are determined by the rendering engine, and the fact that it's mental ray is a really good thing because it means you can take objects from Revit into 3D Studio Max, and if you're using mental ray there as well, you can actually use the same materials. These will come straight in, and you can just keep modifying them and working with them in a similar way to what you had in here. And if you've ever wondered how these settings are determined, so see how here I've got this masonry material. Now, how do we know what parameters I'm going to get here? Here it's giving me masonry is one parameter field and relief pattern. If I expand this, I've got a map for that as well, so I can change the bitmaps there. Well, okay, that makes sense. But what if I go to, let's say, concrete? And I'll go for a very simple concrete like this one, non-uniform non-uniform warm grey. Totally different parameters. There's a bumps slot, and I can put a map in there. The colour field, well, it doesn't even have a map. I suppose I could go and see if I can choose one here. I can go to image and then choose one there. But and that's called a diffuse map. Let's go and see with, say, the paint. Okay, so for this one, I've got different fields again. Now, you might think you'll never learn all of these. You'll never know what fields you're going to get when you choose a particular material. And it actually does take a long time to remember or even realise how it's all organised. The reason it's not clear is because you don't see all the settings here. This is actually a cut down version. In 3D Studio Max, you will see all the settings. What these are, you'll see, is it's something called an arc and design material, which is a kind of material you have in 3D Studio Max. And so they give you a selection of settings based on the material template. So these are all considered templates, and they determine the settings that you get here. But they're actually all the same kind of material. It's just one of the many kinds of materials you have in 3D Studio Max. And I will show you that in a moment, but so I'll come back to Max in a minute. All right, so because you'll be doing a lot of the work for your render materials in the 3D software, it's not worth going too far with the Minicad program. If you're using Revit, you're lucky because you'll be able to bring them across, but you're going to be doing the rendering in the 3D program, so it's really not worth making a lot of adjustments in Revit because you won't really have a good idea how it's going to render anyway. So if you can do something quickly in Revit, do it, but it's not worth going too far with the render materials. But all the other materials, so for things like the views I was showing you before, the plans, sections, elevations, the colours that you see there are still materials based. So you may as well, or you have to get those set up in the CAD programs. So it's just a matter of thinking about the use that you need to make of the materials. So for the graphics-based views, So, in other words, non-rendered views, set up everything you need to in the CAD programs. But for render materials, if it's quick and you don't really have to do much work, do some of it in the CAD program, but don't worry much about the render materials because you're doing most of the work in the 3D programs, and you can not only complete your material assignments, but obviously create any new materials you need to and modify materials that you've imported from some CAD programs, particularly Revit to 3D Studio Max. And so again, the rendering software determines a lot of the options that you have available. So I probably should just give you some better examples of that, and this will hopefully get you on the road to actually using using 3D Studio Max, because as you've probably guessed already, you can model quite a lot in Revit, bring it into 3D Studio Max, and then just tweak the materials and the lighting and actually start doing some renders. So I'm going to, do I need to save this? I probably don't. I'm just going to reset and let me save, yes. Okay, so got a new file. I didn't want to show you in that one because I was using V-Ray there. So I would have given different material options. Just so you can see quickly, on the rendering menu, you've got render setup. And this is something you're going to use constantly as you use 3D Studio Max. Also on the main toolbar, you can get to it there, you've got render setup there. If you haven't used rendering in Autodesk programs very much before, just remember the teapot is kind of the rendering symbol in all their programs. The teapot? Yeah. When you see that, it usually means rendering or something to do with rendering. So here we've got 3 teapot buttons. They're all something to do with rendering. I want the first one, render setup. Now, if you did the setup that I showed in the video last week, you won't need to do this every time. But it's still important to know basically where this setting is and how to adjust it. So on the first tab here, you can see there's this common parameters roll up, and you can actually just roll the whole thing up by clicking on the top part there. So that minimizes it, or you can lift it up, but I'm just going to minimize the whole thing. And I want the last panel there, which is Assign Renderer. And you can see here I've got V-Ray set as my rendering engine. I want to show you Mental Ray. So I'm going to click on the Browse button there, and you can see I've got quite a few engines to choose from. Now, you may not have this many, but you'll always have Mental Ray. And click OK. Yeah. Yeah, Revit and 3D Studio Max and AutoCAD. It's actually built into all of them, has been for about 5 years. And Maya and Softimage, all of those big Autodesk programs, Motion Builder as well, Mudbox, all the big 3D capable software they make now comes with Mental Ray as standard. So it's a really good standard renderer to use, and really good quality as well. So I've got Mental Ray set now. I'm not going to show you much about the actual engine, but what I want to show you now is if I go to my material editor. Now, firstly, if you don't see it like this, always remember there's 2 modes. Up here, it could be in the Slate Material Editor, which is the big version here with the full node-based work area. Or, back to the modes menu, it could be on Compact. So it's got those 2 different modes. They do the same thing. You can do exactly the same things in either mode. It's just different ways of looking at your materials. So I'll go back to the Compact. And that's the one, if you're new to this, I'd be starting with the Compact Material Editor. So here I've got all these preview slots. So I'm going to show you, if I choose a slot here, there's 2 ways I can start making this material different, or 2 quick ways. There are lots of ways, but 2 really quick ways. I can get a new material, and I'm going to do that in a moment. I'm going to get a new material completely and replace this one. But also, because of the kind of material it is, it has templates. And this is a feature of Mental Ray. So Mental Ray gives you this arc and design material, it's called, so for architecture and design. That's actually what you're using in Revit. They're all arc and design materials. So they're actually streamlined versions of it called Pro Materials, but behind the scenes, trust me, it's all arc and design. So arc and design materials come with this template, or a list of templates, which is just a bunch of quick settings. So I can go to, say, satin varnished wood, and it adjusts all the settings there to give me a starting point for wood, and now I can fine-tune it. So that's something that you only get with Mental Ray. This is actually part of Mental Ray, even though it's within 3D Studio. So that's all determined by the fact that I'm using Mental Ray. Click on here, and I'll go to, say, the let's go to this diffuse slot here, and maybe I'll just make it change size. So I can change the size of the boards there, or something like that. And oh, sorry, I want to make that smaller. That's better. What else can I do? Maybe I can make it darker. So let's try 0.2. Okay, so all of those things can be adjusted in the materials parameters. And that's something that is, in theory, possible in Revit, but in practice, a lot more difficult, because even though it's actually the same code that you're given, the same basic material, and it does all the same things at first, you don't get access to all the same settings in the same ways as you do in a full 3D program. So, Arc and Design is one of the materials that Mental Ray gives you, but just to make it clear, I'm going to go Get Material. And that will show the full list of the different kinds of materials you have. Make this a bit bigger. All right, now I'll come back to this Autodesk Material Library. That's actually an expanded version of the one you get with Revit now. So there's, a stack of pre-made materials in there, and they're not bad. But you'll see after a while you can make your own, and they'll often be better. So up here, you can see we've got this materials section. That's where you get the base materials, and we've got these two different kinds. We've got standard. So that's what comes with 3D Studio Max. No matter what, if you didn't have Mental Ray, you'd still be able to make all of these different kinds of materials. And they all do work with Mental Ray as well. But then you've got the Mental Ray specific materials, and that's this list here. So all of these will work with Mental Ray and some other engines, but not, just to quickly show you again, in the render setup, I've still got it open, I'll just bring it to the top. Okay, so probably one thing I should have mentioned before is something that it's easy to forget. You've got this thing called the default scanline renderer. So before Mental Ray came along, that's the renderer that 3D Studio Max used. So it's a very basic rendering engine. Maya has the equivalent sort of engine, and all 3D programs tend to have something like that. But for years, they've had specialist rendering plugins like Mental Ray. Well, you'll need to research this for your projects, but I'll point out a couple of the others. Have you heard of any other popular engines? Something you mentioned one before. Vero. Okay, Vero is huge. I use it. It's a great engine. What about Maxwell? Have you heard of Maxwell? It's a great engine. I'm sure come across that when you're doing your research. Fantastic engine. I won't tell you why we're not using it, but you can work that out when you do your research. RenderMan. It's another one. That's Pixar's engine. Okay, so they're the sorts of things when you're doing your research on rendering engines you want to look at. Start by getting an overview of the different render engines available, and I've only mentioned a few. I'd expect you to probably list about double the ones I've mentioned, just briefly, just so it shows you've done some of your own research into the different engines around. And there are tons of them, heaps. Okay, so so with the scanline renderer, I wouldn't have access to all these mental array materials. And so Arc and Design, we'll be spending, probably a couple of weeks just looking at the Arc and Design material, but there's some other really cool ones like the car paint, subsurface scattering materials as well. They're all good. And so that's one of the things that mental array gives you. And so that's based on the rendering engine. And so that's the last major point that I make about that, I suppose. But just remember that workflow. The 3D rendered images, or the rendered perspectives and other images you're going to be making in 3D software, are going to make a lot of use of different materials, and so it makes sense to set them up in the 3D program as opposed to the CAD programs, for obvious reasons, I suppose. And just in case you haven't seen it, if you're in the CAD program, it's very difficult to see how this material is going to look. Just so you can see how easy it is in a 3D program, I'll make a few things here. So I'm just going to make a plane, and yeah, that's all right. And put this material onto it, and right-clicking on Smooth and Highlights here, I'll go to Hardware Shading and Enable Shadows. So that'll you'll see in a second show the shadows, but there's nothing casting shadows yet. And then this material, to make it show up on the surface there, I'm going to enable that in the viewport as well. So that gives a pretty good idea how it will look. But to make it even better, I'll also turn on hardware shading for the materials. Now, that's going to a checker display, don't worry about that, I'll show you why that is. It doesn't, I know what it is, it doesn't like this, this map. There we are. Okay, so now notice how it's darker. Before, when I wasn't using hardware display, it was just showing me the map, basically. But there we are. So now, if I make it a little bit more involved, let's say put a bump map on. Oh, we've got a bump map. Let's just ramp it up. So notice how even the bumps will show up. I'll maybe just turn off the diffuse map so it's even clearer. So sometimes it takes a bit of refreshing to wake it up. There we are. So I'll put a light in as well, just to make it even easier to see. So I'll just go for a area spot. So it might be hard to see there, but there's some texture coming up on that surface. Now, in any other program, you wouldn't even see that because that's not a color, that's actually the bump. So if I was to render this, it's actually a bump pattern determined by the material. And so in Max though, you can preview that in the viewport. That's something you'd never be able to do in Revit. So it just makes more sense to do most of the work with the render materials in the render program, which is going to be your 3D software. And so essentially, just to point out the rendering software one last time, even though we're going to be looking at the rendering programs separately to the 3D software, it's important to realise that generally you use the rendering programs as a plugin to the 3D programs, even though you can run them standalone. So yeah, you can actually run mental array standalone. Anyhow, have a break, I'll probably give you a few little examples you can work on with 3D Studio Max. I also want to show you where there's a lot of tutorials that will keep you busy over the next few weeks. But I definitely also want to just get right through all this workflow so we can have a look at what you need to do for your projects as well. But I'll stop that recording there, so you definitely can go back over all of this.